Never think you're poor, even when you have nothing. Machiavelli. Poverty is not the absence of money, it's the absence of power. The greatest illusion of weakness begins the moment you start believing that what you lack defines who you are. Machiavelli understood this long before our modern world was built on appearances and comparison. He knew that poverty of the mind creates slaves, while poverty of the pocket only creates hunger. One can be rich in silence, in awareness, in discipline, and yet appear to have nothing. The other can possess gold, fame, and applause, and still live chained to invisible misery. So I'll ask you, what do you really have? And what do you really lack? The world today teaches you to measure your worth by what you can show, by your possessions, your status, your followers, your comfort. But Machiavelli warned, the man who lets others define his value will always be ruled by them. True poverty begins the moment you surrender your inner authority, when your emotions, your peace, your focus belong to someone else. You can lose everything and still stand unbroken if you never lose that authority. But if you let the world dictate how you should feel, think, and move, you can have everything and still remain poor. You see, the greatest danger of feeling poor is not financial, it's psychological. When a man convinces himself he has nothing, he stops seeing the power of what he already holds: his time, his mind, his perception, his will. He starts begging for validation instead of building it. He starts seeking help where he should seek growth. Machiavelli believed that those who appear weak are rarely left in peace, because power respects only power, even when silent, even when invisible. In this video, we're going to explore why you should never think you're poor, even when you have nothing. We'll uncover how poverty is used as a weapon of control, how the human mind can be enslaved through the illusion of lack, and how you can reverse this conditioning to awaken a wealth that no external force can touch. You'll learn how Machiavelli's hidden philosophy can transform your relationship with money, self-worth, and power, even if the world calls you broke. Before we dive deeper, I want you to pause for a moment and write this in the comments. I already have everything I need within me. Say it as a declaration, not a wish, because once your mind accepts it, reality begins to rearrange around that belief. And as you stay until the end of this video, you'll see why this one sentence can change the way you perceive every form of loss, scarcity, and silence in your life. So if you've ever felt powerless, overlooked, or forgotten, stay with me. What you're about to hear will not be motivation. It will be revelation. Machiavelli didn't speak to inspire the masses. He spoke to awaken the few who dare to see the world as it truly is. And by the end of this, you will understand that the poorest man is not the one who owns nothing. It's the one who forgot he could create everything. When Niccolo Machiavelli wrote The Prince in the 16th century, Europe was in chaos, kingdoms collapsing, alliances shifting, and power being traded like gold. Yet amidst this political turbulence, Machiavelli saw something deeper than strategy or conquest. He saw the psychology of survival. He observed that the strongest leaders were not always those with the most soldiers, money, or influence, but those who mastered perception, scarcity, and control. For him, poverty was never just a social condition, it was a tool, a mirror revealing the weakness or strength of one's inner governance. In Renaissance Florence, being poor was not simply an economic reality, it was often a public humiliation. But Machiavelli noticed that those who accepted their lack became docile, dependent, and predictable. They were easy to manipulate because they had surrendered their pride and their ability to act. Meanwhile, those who maintained dignity, even in ruin, possessed a strange kind of invincibility. He understood that power was not held by kings alone, but by anyone who could shape perception, especially their own. He wrote that fortune is a woman, meaning life itself is unpredictable, emotional, and easily dominated by those bold enough to act with confidence. To Machiavelli, the man who feels poor waits, the man who refuses to think poor moves. This distinction between feeling and thinking was his secret weapon. Poverty in thought is paralysis, but poverty in circumstance can be turned into strategy, humility, and preparation. Psychologically, this is still true today. Modern science shows that the brain cannot distinguish much between reality and belief. If you think you are powerless, your body, your emotions, and even your opportunities begin to reflect that assumption. Your attention filters out what could lift you higher, focusing instead on what keeps you low. The subconscious builds walls around you, not from reality, but from perception. Machiavelli predicted this centuries before psychology gave it language. That's why he taught rulers, and indirectly, thinkers, to cultivate the appearance of strength, even when they have none. Not as deception, but as discipline. To hold your posture high when your resources are low is to command your nervous system to stay alive, alert, and creative. It's not arrogance, it's self-preservation. The true danger lies not in losing wealth, but in losing the image of wealth within your mind. Because once that collapses, your enemies, visible or invisible, no longer need to defeat you. You'll defeat yourself, and that's the tragedy of our era. The modern poor man is not defined by what he earns, but by what he believes he deserves. Machiavelli would look at our world, obsessed with showing abundance, terrified of simplicity. And he'd say, "You've all become beggars wearing crowns, not because you lack resources, but because you've let illusion rule your worth." Let's go deeper. Because the idea of never thinking you're poor is not about pretending. It's not about closing your eyes to reality or denying your struggle. It's about reclaiming sovereignty over your perception. The one thing that determines whether your mind becomes your prison or your kingdom. Machiavelli understood that human beings are governed by two invisible forces, perception and fear. Whoever controls perception controls the mind, and whoever conquers fear controls their destiny. Poverty, therefore, is not merely a lack of things. It's a distortion of perception and a submission to fear. When you start saying, "I have nothing," you subconsciously declare yourself powerless. You position your mind beneath the weight of scarcity, and your actions follow that declaration. But when you say, "I may have little, but I am not poor," something inside you begins to shift. Your spine straightens, your thoughts reorganize. You begin to look for possibilities instead of pity. This is the psychological alchemy Machiavelli practiced, transforming weakness into will, humiliation into strategy, and scarcity into focus. Let's uncover the principles behind it, the timeless laws that separate the enslaved mind from the sovereign one, the same laws that can turn apparent poverty into inner power. Principle 1. Never show desperation. In The Prince, Machiavelli wrote that men judge more by the eyes than by the hands, meaning people rarely see your true condition. They see how you carry it. The man who acts desperate attracts manipulation. The man who acts composed attracts opportunity. Desperation is not a financial state. It's a vibration of weakness that tells the world, "You can use me." When you display it, you unconsciously invite predators, in business, in love, in friendship. But when you hold stillness, even in emptiness, you create confusion in the minds of others. They sense that you know something they don't, and that uncertainty gives you leverage. Machiavelli's genius lay in his understanding that control begins where emotion ends. So never show desperation, not even to yourself. Poverty feeds on visibility. The more you express your fear, the more real it becomes. But if you master silence, you begin to own the space that fear once occupied. Principle 2. Poverty is the training ground of greatness. History proves it endlessly. The strongest minds, the most disciplined souls, the most visionary leaders, all were forged in scarcity. Poverty forces introspection. It strips away illusion. It teaches precision because every decision carries weight. Machiavelli admired men who rose not because they were given power, but because they learned to command it within chaos. He observed that when a man is deprived of comfort, his mind becomes sharp like a blade searching for light. The poor man who trains himself to think strategically, not emotionally, becomes more dangerous than the rich man who acts without awareness. Scarcity forces you to observe the laws of cause and consequence. It teaches you not to waste energy on what you cannot control. And that restraint is the first mark of true power. Principle 3. Control your narrative before the world does. Machiavelli understood that power is a story, not an accident. Those who tell their story with confidence are believed, even if they own nothing. Those who remain silent are defined by others, even if they possess everything. You see, when you lose material things, the world often rushes to label you failure, broke, irrelevant. But if you keep speaking from authority, if you frame your struggle as transformation, people begin to reinterpret your position. What was once weakness becomes mystique. What was once poverty becomes prophecy. This is the Machiavellian art of perception. Not to fake strength, but to narrate your weakness with intelligence. The world feeds on impressions. Therefore, whoever commands impressions commands the world. So even if your bank account is empty, your words, your tone, your silence, your posture must speak abundance. Never let the world write your story. Principle 4. Refuse the slave mentality. The most dangerous form of poverty is not material. It's psychological dependency. Machiavelli warned rulers never to trust men who have forgotten how to think for themselves, because dependence breeds deceit. When you believe that salvation must come from outside, a job, a savior, a politician, a benefactor, you surrender the one thing no one can replace: your ability to decide. Poverty becomes permanent when you depend on permission. Freedom begins when you realize you can create outcomes, not just wait for them. That's why the poor man who keeps his pride intact is more powerful than the rich man who begs for approval, because dependency is the silent chain of modern slavery. Break it, and even with nothing, you will begin to feel rich, because you've recovered the source of your autonomy. Principle 5. Don't seek pity. Command respect. Machiavelli despised pity, not because he lacked compassion, but because he saw pity as a transaction that steals dignity. To seek pity is to admit helplessness, to announce that your suffering defines you. But the man who seeks respect, even in suffering, transforms pain into gravitas. He carries his wounds with discipline, not drama. And people, whether they understand or not, feel compelled to respect him. The secret of power is not to ask for validation, but to embody value. So if life has stripped you of comfort, of recognition, of wealth, do not expose your scars to attract sympathy. Let them harden your presence. Let your silence become your statement, because pity feeds dependence, but respect feeds growth. Now let me ask you this, and I want you to answer honestly in the comments. Do you think people would still respect you if they saw everything you've lost? Think deeply, because how you answer reveals whether your power depends on appearance or on essence. Principle 6. Transform lack into focus. Machiavelli believed that limitation sharpens clarity. The man who has too much becomes distracted. The one who has little must prioritize. Poverty, when seen through the right eyes, becomes purification. It filters out what is unnecessary. It teaches you to master your energy instead of scattering it. When you have limited means, every move matters, and this breeds precision. That is why many who start with nothing eventually dominate, because they learn how to think like strategists, not consumers. The modern world tries to drown you in abundance, information, temptation, noise, so you never focus long enough to grow. But when you lack, you listen, you notice, you plan, and those who plan silently while others consume blindly, they become unstoppable. Principle 7. Master the inner court. Machiavelli compared the mind to a royal court, filled with desires, fears, emotions, and impulses all competing for influence. The poor man allows his fears to rule that court. The rich in spirit man disciplines his thoughts like soldiers. He knows that ruling the mind is harder than ruling a nation, because while nations obey laws, the mind obeys only focus. Every thought of lack, every comparison, every envy, these are rebels within your court, and if you let them whisper too long, they will overthrow your inner peace. So Machiavelli's advice still stands. Govern your inner state as a ruler governs his land, with patience, authority, and strategy. You can't always expand your territory, but you can strengthen your borders. Protect your mind like a fortress, because the war for power always begins inside. Principle 8. Understand the power of distance. When you're in a state of lack, you'll feel an instinctive pull to chase opportunities, people, approval. But Machiavelli would warn against it. He knew that power grows in distance. The more you chase, the less valuable you appear. Distance creates curiosity, and curiosity creates control. When you act as though you already possess what you need, you magnetize attention. When you beg for it, you repel it. This is the paradox of attraction. Those who act full attract. Those who act empty are ignored. So when you feel poor, practice restraint. Stay still. Let the world come to you. Machiavelli once said, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." In psychological terms, that means it is better to command respect through presence than to beg for affection through neediness. The mind that learns to wait without anxiety becomes magnetic. Principle 9. Recognize wealth in intangibles. The truly rich are not those with overflowing accounts, but those who own invisible assets: time, clarity, solitude, self-respect, and control of attention. These are currencies no one can steal. Poverty begins when you trade them for fleeting comforts, when you sell your time for approval or your focus for distraction. Machiavelli saw that rulers fall not because they lose money, but because they lose attention. They stop watching themselves. The same is true for you. You cannot manage what you do not observe. Guard your awareness like treasure, and you will never be poor again. Principle 10. Practice noble pride. This is not arrogance, it is inner posture, a quiet belief that your worth is not for sale. Machiavelli noted that men with noble pride could be dethroned but never humiliated, because humiliation requires participation. The one who knows his worth does not kneel before circumstance. He may bend, but he never breaks. This pride is not loud, it's sacred. It's the invisible armor of those who refuse to think poor even when stripped of everything. Machiavelli once wrote, "He who builds on the people builds on mud, but he who builds on self-discipline builds on stone." To think poor is to build your identity on mud, constantly shifting, fragile, reactive. To think rich in spirit is to build on bedrock, steady, silent, unbreakable. When you've lost everything, when life leaves you standing alone, stripped of illusions and possessions, that's when the world watches closely. It wants to see whether you will collapse or rise. And in that moment, Machiavelli's most profound lesson becomes real. The poorest man is not the one who owns nothing, but the one who has surrendered the theater of his own mind. To reclaim power, you must become the director again. You must decide what each event means before someone else writes the narrative for you. Machiavelli believed that fortune, the unpredictable goddess of life, always tests a man's composure before granting him power. She throws him into loss, uncertainty, and isolation to measure whether his mind is ruled by circumstance or by discipline. Those who collapse under misfortune prove they were never fit to rule themselves. But those who remain poised amid ruin, who still plan, still think, still act with intention, they are the ones fortune eventually kneels before. So let's continue, unveiling the deeper psychological laws hidden beneath this Machiavellian philosophy, the kind that transforms your poverty into an invisible weapon. Principle 11. Silence is capital. In times of lack, words become expensive. Every complaint, every confession of fear, every explanation of why you've fallen, it drains your invisible currency, your dignity. Machiavelli taught that rulers must know when to speak and when to remain unreadable, because silence protects the mystery of your strength. When people cannot read your pain, they overestimate your power. When you speak too soon, they define you through your wounds. Learn to hold your tongue when you feel the urge to justify yourself. The strong do not announce their rebuilding, they let results speak. You don't owe the world an explanation for your low seasons. Your silence is the sound of strategy. Protect it. Principle 12. Use isolation as refinement, not punishment. Many fear solitude because it echoes their own emptiness. But Machiavelli knew solitude refines power. When you have nothing and no one to distract you, your mind becomes a mirror. And though it may first reveal your fears, it eventually reveals your essence. Poverty isolates you so you can see what was never truly yours. In that isolation, your vision clarifies, your energy recalibrates, and your sense of self solidifies. Solitude is the forge of independence. Those who avoid it remain dependent on noise, flattery, and validation. Those who embrace it become self-sufficient. Machiavelli would remind you that a ruler must first rule himself in silence before he can rule others in speech. Principle 13. Stop worshipping wealth. Start studying power. Modern society conditions you to chase money as if it were God itself. But Machiavelli made a crucial distinction. Wealth without power is decoration. Power without wealth, however, can create both. He saw money as a servant of strategy, never the master. The poor mind reverses this order. It prays to money while ignoring the discipline that generates it. That's why the rich who lose everything can rebuild, while the poor who win the lottery usually return to dust. They've never studied the psychology of creation. To think like Machiavelli is to ask, what sustains power when everything collapses? The answer is always the same: adaptability, foresight, emotional restraint, and the ability to endure uncertainty without losing focus. Study power, not possession. Because possession ends when luck changes. Power begins when you no longer depend on luck. Principle 14. Emotional detachment is wealth. Machiavelli's realism shocked his readers because it stripped politics of morality and sentiment. But his true insight was psychological. Emotional detachment multiplies effectiveness. When you're attached to comfort, approval, or outcomes, you become fragile. When you detach, you see reality clearly, without flattery or fear. Emotional detachment doesn't mean coldness. It means clarity. The mind that is not enslaved by emotion can navigate crisis with precision. The man who thinks poor panics when the tide shifts. The man who thinks rich adapts. The difference? The first reacts to emotion. The second acts from reason. Machiavelli believed the most powerful leaders were not those who loved deeply, but those who understood deeply and used that understanding to move wisely. Detach, observe, act. That's wealth in motion. Principle 15. Hide your rebirth. Machiavelli advised that when a prince reforms his state, he must do it quietly. The same applies to you when reforming your life. Don't broadcast your healing. Don't post your process. Move in silence until your transformation is irreversible. Because the world loves your downfall but doubts your resurrection. Keep your progress hidden until it's undeniable. Poverty exposes you to ridicule. But if you keep your rebirth private, your reappearance will carry mystery and gravity. When people cannot predict your rise, they cannot block it. Machiavelli understood that the most dangerous power is the one unseen. The power that moves silently beneath the surface until the right moment arrives. Now pause for a moment and reflect. Write this in the comments. I am rebuilding in silence, because even as you repeat it, you start commanding your subconscious to shift from weakness to strategy. Principle 16. Reject the morality of victimhood. Our age glorifies weakness. It teaches you to wear your pain as an identity, to demand sympathy rather than mastery. Machiavelli would see this as collective decline, the replacement of virtue with validation. He believed that greatness demands accountability. To think poor is to constantly justify failure. To think rich is to constantly search for cause and correction. When you stop blaming fortune, you start shaping it. Every misfortune carries data, not punishment. Study it. Extract wisdom from your mistakes. The victim looks for someone to blame. The strategist looks for something to learn. That's the difference between spiritual poverty and spiritual wealth. Principle 17. Train your gaze on the long game. Machiavelli saw time as a weapon. The poor mind seeks immediate relief. The powerful mind plans for legacy. That's why the disciplined appear heartless. They sacrifice comfort for continuity. If you think only of the next meal, the next praise, the next distraction, you will live in loops of survival. But if you think like a strategist, seeing 10, 20 years ahead, you start shaping the field itself. To the impatient, time feels like an enemy. To the wise, it's an ally. Machiavelli would tell you, those who can endure emptiness today without panic will feast tomorrow without guilt. Wealth is not in the reward, It's in the capacity to wait. Principle 18. Know the art of selective indifference. Indifference is not ignorance, it's selective focus. Machiavelli wrote that a ruler must seem interested in all things, but be truly invested in few. The same applies to your energy. When you're poor, you cannot afford to care about everything. The poor mind leaks energy through unnecessary emotion, gossip, outrage, comparison. But power grows through conservation. Train yourself to be indifferent to the irrelevant. Not every comment deserves a response. Not every opportunity deserves pursuit. When your indifference becomes strategic, your attention turns into currency, and that's wealth no economy can manipulate. Principle 19. Replace envy with observation. Envy is spiritual poverty, a declaration that someone else's path threatens your own. Machiavelli taught rulers to study their rivals, not resent them. Observation gives information, envy gives exhaustion. Every person who surpasses you reveals a blueprint. The poor mind asks, why not me? The wise mind asks, how did they do it? Study others like a scientist, not a critic. Every success you witness is an education paid for by someone else's effort. By replacing envy with curiosity, you rise above emotional scarcity and enter intellectual wealth. You become too busy evolving to compare. Principle 20. Discipline is the currency of kings. In Machiavelli's philosophy, discipline was not about morality, it was about control. The disciplined man commands respect even from his enemies. The undisciplined man loses credibility even with himself. Poverty erodes discipline because it tempts you with shortcuts, excuses, indulgence, despair. But those who maintain order amid chaos emerge indestructible. Wake up early, train your body, guard your focus, control your consumption of food, of information, of emotion. Every act of discipline reaffirms, I am not poor, I am in training. The mind that obeys itself is already rich, regardless of its possessions. There's a secret behind all these laws, one that Machiavelli implied but never wrote directly. Power, he believed, was not about domination. It was about stability, the ability to stand still while others collapse. That's the real meaning of wealth, because money fluctuates, status fades, beauty decays. But the man who remains stable, unshaken, untouchable in his center, possesses something eternal. That is why those who think poor always chase, and those who think rich always attract. The former live through reaction, the latter live through intention. When you have nothing, but you still wake up with purpose, when you still move with calm, when you still treat others with dignity, you are already in possession of the greatest fortune, inner governance. That's what Machiavelli revered. Not kings draped in silk, but men draped in mastery. When philosophy ends, practice begins, because no matter how much you understand Machiavelli's wisdom, it means nothing if you can't live it, if you can't embody power when life pushes you to your knees. So now, let's turn what you've learned into action. Let's translate thought into form, because mastery begins not with knowing, but with doing. First, remember this. You do not need wealth to practice power. You need awareness. You need control. You need structure. The richest people on earth are not those who own the most, but those who master the least. Their time, their emotions, their words, their attention. These are the four invisible currencies that determine every form of success. Let's begin with the currency of time. The poor mind wastes it because it feels powerless within it. But the strategic mind treats time as an ally, a tool to create a symmetry. Machiavelli advised princes to act swiftly in decision but patiently in execution. Apply this law daily. Each morning, define the one thing that moves your life forward. Not 10, not 5, 1. Then guard your focus around it like a fortress. Time, when guided by clarity, becomes a weapon. But when left to chance, it becomes a thief. If you learn to master time even in poverty, you are no longer a victim of delay. You are an architect of destiny. Next is the currency of emotion. Poverty provokes strong emotion, shame, anger, fear. But Machiavelli taught that power belongs to those who can act opposite to the emotion that controls others. When insulted, stay calm. When humiliated, stand tall. When rejected, remain composed. These are not passive reactions. They are strategic responses that train your nervous system to serve you. Try this. Each time something provokes you, take one deep breath and imagine you are a prince observing chaos from a high balcony. You are not the storm. You are the observer of the storm. That simple exercise separates you from emotional poverty, because emotions lose their power once they are seen clearly. Now we move to the currency of words. Words are invisible architecture. They shape how others perceive you and how you perceive yourself. Machiavelli said, "He who controls language controls power." Stop speaking like a beggar of life. Don't say, "I can't afford this," or "I'll never make it." Replace it with, "I'm not ready yet," or "I'm preparing to earn it." Words reprogram perception. Every phrase of scarcity you utter feeds the identity of poverty, but every phrase of intention builds the identity of authority. Speak as if your voice carries weight, because it does. Then there is the currency of attention, the most valuable of all. What you look at, you empower. What you ignore, you weaken. The poor mind obsesses over problems. The rich mind studies solutions. The poor mind scrolls. The rich mind reflects. You become what you repeatedly notice. So every night before sleeping, ask yourself, where did my attention live today? If it lived in comparison, gossip, or self-doubt, you've been robbed. If it lived in purpose, learning, or creation, you've gained interest on your spiritual capital. Control your attention, and you control your reality. Now, let's go deeper into the Machiavellian habits that will make this mindset unbreakable. Habit 1. Begin each day like a strategist, not a survivor. Most people wake up reacting, checking their phone, chasing noise. You must rise like a ruler, in silence, before speaking, before scrolling. Take 5 minutes to review your mental territory. Ask, what deserves my energy today? What drains it? What can I control and what must I release? Write one sentence that defines your mission for the day. It can be as simple as, today I protect my focus. When the mind begins the day with direction, chaos loses its grip. This is what Machiavelli meant when he said, "Fortune favors the bold." Boldness begins with clarity. Habit 2. Practice economic minimalism. In a world that worships excess, restraint is rebellion. Train yourself to find satisfaction in simplicity, not as poverty, but as power. Machiavelli believed that great rulers practiced austerity, not because they loved suffering, but because it kept them independent. Every time you buy something unnecessary, you sell a piece of your freedom. Every time you consume without purpose, you declare dependence. Here's a practical test. For 1 week, buy only what is essential. Then observe what happens. You'll feel discomfort at first, but beneath that discomfort is liberation. The realization that your peace doesn't depend on possession. This practice doesn't make you poorer, it makes you sovereign. Habit 3. Treat solitude as a temple, not a prison. Most people drown their silence with noise because they fear what they'll hear inside. But your transformation begins in solitude. Each day, spend at least 15 minutes alone, without music, without distraction, without movement. Sit with your thoughts and observe them without judgment. Machiavelli spent years in exile, stripped of honor, yet he used that isolation to study human nature. From his solitude came The Prince, one of the most influential works in history. Your own solitude can do the same. Out of silence, strategy is born. Habit 4. Guard your dignity in public. When life humiliates you, do not beg for sympathy. Display composure. You are not required to announce your suffering to the world. Power grows in those who keep their battles private. Machiavelli observed that rulers who revealed too much emotion lost authority. Those who remained poised gained fear and respect. When people see you calm under pressure, they project strength onto you, even when you're uncertain inside. Make composure your default posture. It's your invisible armor. Habit 5. Convert every loss into data. When something fails, a plan, a relationship, a dream, most people grieve, complain, or retreat. Don't. Study it like a scientist. Ask, what pattern created this? What belief allowed it? What emotion blinded me? Write your answers. Patterns reveal themselves only to those who observe them. Machiavelli would dissect every political failure not as tragedy, but as research. You must do the same with your life. Every loss carries information that can prevent 100 future ones. If you see failure as data, you'll never truly lose again. Habit 6. Maintain physical order. External chaos feeds internal confusion. Poverty often manifests as disorganization, cluttered space, scattered focus. Each morning, clean one small area of your environment. This ritual may seem trivial, but it reconditions your brain toward precision. Machiavelli emphasized order because he knew that rulers who cannot govern their surroundings cannot govern their minds. The man who disciplines his space silently trains his mind to obey structure. Habit 7. Establish a no-complaint rule. For 7 days, refuse to complain, not even internally. Every complaint reinforces a victim identity. When something goes wrong, reframe it. Say, "Good, a lesson." When you discipline your language, you reshape your mental chemistry. This rule rewires you for stoic power. It doesn't mean suppressing emotion. It means refusing to feed weakness. Remember, energy flows where attention goes. So stop feeding lack. Feed strength. Habit 8. Invest in learning every day. Machiavelli studied history relentlessly. He believed that understanding human nature was the foundation of strategy. When you have no money, make knowledge your currency. Read an hour a day. Study psychology, history, negotiation, persuasion, the disciplines of power. Learning keeps you mentally rich when the world calls you poor. As Machiavelli wrote, "The wise man learns from others' misfortunes." Every page you read is a fortune you inherit without paying a cent. Habit 9. Reward yourself with mastery, not comfort. The poor mind seeks comfort after small effort. The strategic mind seeks mastery through repetition. Each time you finish a difficult task, don't escape into distraction. Reward yourself with deeper focus. Write, train, build, reflect. The reward of power is more power. Machiavelli admired those who could delay pleasure, because that delay multiplies satisfaction later. The longer you can wait, the more wealth you accumulate, not in coins, but in control. Habit 10. Create rituals of gratitude with authority. Gratitude is not weakness, it's intelligence. It rewires the nervous system to focus on abundance rather than absence, but practice it with authority. Not like a beggar thanking life for crumbs, but like a sovereign acknowledging blessings. Each night, write 3 things you are grateful for and 1 lesson you've earned through hardship. Gratitude without reflection is emotion. Gratitude with reflection is growth. This subtle act transforms your perception of poverty into awareness of abundance. Now, let's discuss the obstacles, the traps that make this transformation difficult. Obstacle 1. Comparison. You cannot think rich while measuring yourself by others' illusions. Social media is a marketplace of deception designed to make you forget your worth. Machiavelli would say, "Never envy another's fortune until you've seen their mind." What you see is not their wealth, it's their mask. Free yourself from comparison by remembering this. No one's timeline applies to you. The true ruler of his destiny walks alone, unmoved by noise. Obstacle 2. Impatience. You cannot harvest before planting. You cannot build stability in a week. The poor mindset seeks immediate relief. The strategic mindset builds foundations. Machiavelli's own rise took decades of obscurity, exile, and failure. But his patience turned rejection into immortality. Be patient with your process. Progress unseen is still progress. Time is not your enemy, it's your accomplice. Obstacle 3. Emotional fatigue. Transformation demands energy. There will be days you want to give up, days when your mind says, "What's the point?" When that happens, remind yourself, the point is me. The point is that your mind is being trained to obey your will. When fatigue hits, rest, don't retreat. Power is built in cycles, tension, recovery, rise. Treat fatigue as part of training, not as failure. Obstacle 4. Negative influence. Be ruthless about who has access to your energy. Machiavelli warned rulers to avoid flatterers and cowards, because both distort judgment. Surround yourself with people who challenge you, not drain you. If you can't find such people, walk alone. Solitude with purpose is better than company with confusion. Remember, proximity is programming. Protect your environment as you would your crown. Obstacle 5. Forgetting the goal. The purpose of this journey is not to accumulate, it's to awaken. You're not trying to escape poverty. You're learning to rule it. You're not trying to imitate power. You're learning to become it. The goal is sovereignty, to reach a state where external loss no longer dictates internal peace. When you remember that, setbacks lose their sting, because everything that happens becomes part of your ascension. Now, let's seal this transformation with 3 daily practices. Rituals to anchor the Machiavellian mindset. Ritual 1. The morning command. Each morning, stand before a mirror and say aloud, "I do not chase. I attract through discipline." Repeat it slowly. Look yourself in the eyes as you say it. This affirmation is not mystical, it's neurological. It conditions your mind to act from calm dominance rather than need. Machiavelli would call this the appearance of fortune, commanding your day with posture and purpose before it begins. Ritual 2. The evening audit. Before sleep, write 3 sentences. What went well, what weakened me, and what I will refine tomorrow. This transforms reflection into strategy. You are no longer a passive observer of your life. You become its analyst. Over time, this nightly practice rewires your brain for self-governance, the essence of Machiavellian mastery. Ritual 3. The weekly reset. Once a week, perform a symbolic act of renewal. Clean your space, delete distractions, fast from noise. Each reset is a reminder that power must be maintained. Machiavelli wrote that even the most stable kingdoms decay without vigilance. The same is true for the mind. Discipline is not a one-time act. It's a constant restoration of order. When you live this way, deliberately, intelligently, calmly, you stop being a victim of fortune and become its equal. You understand that everything external is temporary, but inner stability is eternal. Poverty cannot touch a mind that refuses to think poor. So as you move forward, remember this truth. Every act of discipline builds invisible wealth. Every moment of calm under chaos earns interest in power. Every time you refuse to complain, compare, or beg, you invest in yourself. That's what Machiavelli meant when he said fortune belongs to the bold, because boldness is simply the refusal to think poor. Now you understand the truth Machiavelli hid beneath the surface of his philosophy, that poverty and power are not opposites. They are states of perception, mirrors reflecting how deeply you understand yourself. The man who identifies with lack becomes its servant. The man who interprets lack as preparation becomes its master. That is the secret most people never discover, because they spend their entire lives trying to escape their poverty instead of transforming it. Machiavelli's wisdom is not about domination. It's about internal order. It's about standing, unmoved while the world trembles. About keeping your composure when everything falls apart. About protecting the empire of your mind when fortune steals the empire of your circumstances. The true prince, he said, is not crowned by others but by his own awareness. His crown is invisible, forged from self-discipline, silence, and patience. You see, life will test you exactly at the level you claim to be powerful. If you say, "I am strong," life will show you chaos to test your stillness. If you say, "I am rich in spirit," life will take something from you to see whether your belief survives emptiness. These trials are not cruelty. They are calibration. They measure the integrity of your inner structure, because power without testing is illusion. When everything you rely on disappears, your status, your reputation, your relationships, your money, what remains? That remainder is your truth. And if that remainder is peace, purpose, and presence, then you were never poor. But if that remainder is bitterness, panic, and blame, then your wealth was always an illusion. Machiavelli's philosophy was never meant only for rulers. It was meant for anyone willing to rule their mind in a world ruled by illusion. Think about how you've been conditioned since childhood. Society teaches you to chase, to accumulate symbols of worth so that others will approve of you. But every chase begins with a confession of lack. Every desperate desire is an admission that you are incomplete. Machiavelli would tell you, the more you chase power, the more it escapes you. The more you cultivate calmness, the more power follows you. Because power, like people, is drawn to stability. To think you are poor is to broadcast instability to the universe. To tell it you cannot hold what you ask for. But when you act with calm purpose, even in emptiness, you declare, I am ready. And that readiness bends fortune toward you. The universe, or in Machiavelli's words, fortune, is not moral. It rewards those who are prepared, not those who are deserving. Preparation is spiritual magnetism. Let's be honest. You will face moments where everything inside you screams that you are nothing. Moments when your phone is silent, your wallet is light, your ambitions seem unreachable. But that's when the real training begins. That's when Machiavelli's principle comes alive. Never think you are poor, even when you have nothing. Because at that point, nothing becomes sacred ground. The void where transformation begins. Poverty forces you to meet yourself. It takes away every distraction, every pretense, every mask, until you must confront the raw question, who am I without what I own? And when you finally answer, I am the one who endures. I am the one who decides. I am the one who continues. Then you are rich beyond measure. Machiavelli believed that life is a chessboard of human psychology, and the rare few who understand their own pieces always win, even if they lose a few pawns. Every hardship you face, every humiliation you survive, every rejection you endure, these are not defeats. They are movements of your inner game. Each one, if observed correctly, advances you towards sovereignty. You see, the poor man waits for external validation. The powerful one validates himself through silence, through discipline, through the elegance of his restraint. When insulted, he does not explain. When underestimated, he does not react. When forgotten, he does not beg. He knows that true power is cumulative, built one quiet choice at a time. Let's reflect on something profound. If all your possessions disappeared tonight, but you woke up tomorrow with an unbroken spirit, the ability to focus, the capacity to adapt, and the will to begin again, would you still call yourself poor? Machiavelli would say no, because power does not vanish. It only changes form. As long as your will remains intact, you can rebuild empires from dust. That is what this entire journey has been about. The resurrection of inner wealth. The kind of wealth that cannot be taxed, stolen, or destroyed. It's the discipline that wakes before dawn, the silence that listens more than it speaks, the pride that refuses to kneel before misfortune. It's the invisible power that makes others wonder how you keep moving when everything should have broken you. And that is your mission now, to live as if you have already inherited everything you seek. Not to fake it, but to embody it. When you walk, walk as if time is yours. When you speak, speak with purpose. When you act, act as if the world already belongs to you. Because in a way, it does. It belongs to those who master perception, not those who beg for relief. Machiavelli once said, "He who builds on the people builds on mud." In other words, do not build your confidence on applause. Build it on endurance. The applause fades, the endurance remains. When life tests you again, and it will, smile. Say to yourself, I've been here before. I know this silence. I know how to command it. You see, the reason the powerful rarely break is not because they never fall. It's because they interpret falling differently. The poor mind calls it failure. The wise mind calls it adjustment. The poor mind panics. The wise mind recalculates. Power is not the absence of fall. It's the grace of recovery. So, as we close this journey, take this truth with you. What you believe about yourself when you have nothing determines what you will attract when you have everything. If you think poor in scarcity, you'll still think poor in abundance. You'll fear loss, you'll chase validation, you'll never rest. But if you think rich in emptiness, calm, deliberate, unafraid, you'll remain powerful, even surrounded by chaos. Because wealth is not stored in banks. It's stored in the way you breathe when life collapses. And maybe that's the greatest lesson Machiavelli could ever teach a modern soul. That fortune bends to the will of the one who no longer needs it. The moment you stop thinking poor, fortune stops treating you like you are. So, stand tall. Even when you stand alone, guard your dignity like treasure. Act with intention when others act from panic. Speak less, think more, move with calm precision. That is how you escape the invisible poverty that enslaves most people. And if these words have reached something deep inside you, then leave a mark. Write this in the comments. I may have nothing, but I am not poor. Because the moment you declare it, you begin to shift reality itself. If this message resonated with you, subscribe to this channel, because this is where we unveil what the world hides. The philosophies that free your mind from dependence, illusion, and fear. Leave a like, share this message with someone who needs it, and remember, fortune only kneels before those who have already mastered themselves. Never think you're poor, even when you have nothing. Because when your mind remains rich, everything else will eventually follow. And when that day comes, you'll realize that Machiavelli's warning was not a lesson about money. It was a prophecy about identity. The moment you reclaim your perception, you inherit your kingdom.